Okay, so we are moving on now to a article called "The Teacher Who Changed My Life." And as you can probably guess, it is about a teacher who changed someone's life. So it's pretty straightforward. But what we're looking at here, as we're looking at this, is to look at his descriptions. He uses really great words and descriptions to create his narrative here. And that's one of the things that we're going to look at in terms of this particular article. So let's take a quick look. So again, we're looking for the thesis. What is the central argument? The one or two, maybe three lines that kind of zero in on what his thesis is. And we're going to be looking at the topic sentences, which is the first sentence of each paragraph, looking at how it sets up the paragraph and also the organization and that kind of thing. So here we go. The person who set the course of my life in the new land I entered as a young war refugee, who in fact nearly dragged me onto the path that would bring all the blessings I've received in America, was a salty-tongued, no-nonsense school teacher named Marjorie Hurd. Okay, so that is his thesis. And he is doing a couple things here. He's using these dashes to insert a little bit of extra information, similar to the paragraph or the parentheses that we saw in some of the other articles that we've been looking at. And he also is using, again, some of these really fun words like salty-tongued, no-nonsense, the school teacher, dragged me onto the path, all of those things. So we're going to look throughout at the wording that he's using, but salty-tongued is much more interesting than saying that she was tough or strict. Salty-tongued just sounds more interesting, so it makes it more interesting for the reader. And then he sets up what he's going to talk about. So he says, when I entered her classroom in 1953, I'd been to 6 schools in 5 years, starting in the Greek village where I was born in 1939. Okay, so now again, he's going to set up the problem. So we're going to see that he, and this is called an underdog story. Underdog stories are very, very popular in film and in books and that kind of thing because they are about people who have a lot to overcome. Like they have a lot going against them, and we really want to see them succeed because they've had such, hardships. So he says here, when I stepped off a ship in New York Harbor on a gray March day in 1949, I was an undersized 9-year-old in short pants who had lost his mother and was coming to live with the father he didn't know. My mother had been imprisoned, tortured, and shot by communist guerrillas for sending me and 3 of my 4 sisters to freedom. She died so that her children could go to their father in the United States. So a couple of things here. We're seeing already some issues, right? So he has to move to New York, right? He's very young. He's undersized and in short pants. And he comes to live with the father he didn't know, right? So that's a problem. That's one issue that he has. His mother had been imprisoned, tortured, and shot for sending him and his sisters to freedom. So we've got already a lot to overcome, right? Those are 2 very, very difficult things to endure. So his mom is killed for sending them to America. He gets to America and he has to live with a father he doesn't know. Okay, we'll keep going. The portly, bald, well-dressed man who met me and my sisters seemed a foreign authoritarian figure. I secretly resented him for not getting the whole family out of Greece early enough to save my mother. Ultimately, I would grow to love him and appreciate how he dealt with becoming a single parent at the age of 56, but at first, our relationship was prickly, full of hostility. So again, now we've got, so at the age of 56, prickly, full of hostility, so he resents his father for not getting the family out, right? So lots to overcome as in this, at the beginning of this story. He says, as father drove us to our new home, tenement in Worcester, Massachusetts, and pointed out the huge brick building that would be our first school in America, I clutched my Greek notebooks from the refugee camp, hoping that my few years of schooling would impress my teachers in this cold, crowded country. They didn't. When my father led me and my 11-year-old sister to Greendale Elementary School, the grim-faced Yankee principal put the 2 of us in a class for the mentally retarded. There was no facility in those days for non-English speaking children. So he was also put into the incorrect class because he didn't speak English, right? So he was put into the wrong place, and he doesn't speak the language. So again, we've got even more things to overcome. And of course, this wording is only used because we know that we couldn't use that now, but back when he was writing, that was, we have more PC terms now for that. But anyway, so, and then we're keeping going. By the time I met Marjorie Hurd 4 years later, I had learned English, been placed in a normal graded class, and had even been chosen for the college preparatory track in the Worcester public school system. I was 13 years old when my father moved us yet again, and I entered Chandler Junior High shortly after the beginning of 7th grade. I found myself surrounded by richer, smarter, and better dressed classmates who looked askance at my strange clothes and heavy accent. Shortly after I arrived, we were told to select a hobby to pursue during club hour on Fridays. The idea of hobbies and clubs made no sense to my immigrant ears, but I decided to follow the prettiest girl in my class, the blue-eyed daughter of the local Lutheran minister. She led me through the door marked Newspaper Club and into the presence of Miss Hurd, the newspaper advisor and English teacher who would become my mentor and my muse. So, a couple of things here. He has to move again, which is tough. Some of the kids were looking at him because of his clothes and his accent. He has to go to like a club hour kind of thing. So he just follows a pretty girl into the newspaper club. But that is a significant moment. That's how he meets Miss Hurd, right? So now in this next paragraph, this is a really important paragraph because of the way that he describes her and the way that he uses quotes to illustrate what she's like. So we're going to kind of look at this paragraph in particular. So it says, a formidable, solidly built woman with salt and pepper hair, a steely eye, and a flat Boston accent. Miss Hurd had no patience with layabouts. So a bunch of things here. Formidable means that she's intimidating, but it's an unusual word, which makes it more interesting. Solidly built means that she's not petite, right? She's a larger woman. Salt and pepper hair is more interesting than saying she has gray hair. A steely eye is kind of one of those eyes that your parents might give you when you get in trouble and you're looking up at them and they're about to give you your punishment, right? So she's like very intimidating eye. She has a Boston accent, and no patience with layabouts means that she has no patience with people who are lazy. Layabouts just means lazy. So then she says, what are all you goof-offs doing here? She bellowed at the would-be journalist. This is the newspaper club. We're going to put out a newspaper. So if there's anybody in this room who doesn't like work, I suggest you go across to the Glee Club now because you're going to work your tails off here. So also by saying she bellowed, that means she has a very loud and intimidating voice, right? And we can tell by what she says here that it goes along with this idea that she doesn't have any patience with people who are lazy, right? So, but it's a much more interesting and fun way to understand what she's like by hearing what she says. So using dialogue in personal narratives is a really important skill, and it's something that helps to make personal narratives come alive. All right, next. I was soon under Miss Hurd's spell. So now, he first meets her. This is what she says. And then here's what comes next. She did indeed teach us to put out a newspaper, skills I honed during my 25 years as a journalist. Soon I asked the principal to transfer me to her English class as well. There, she drilled us on grammar until I finally began to understand the logic and structure of the English language. She assigned stories for us to read and discuss, not tales of heroes like the Greek myths I knew, but stories of underdogs, poor people, even immigrants, who seemed ordinary until a crisis drove them to do something extraordinary. She also introduced us to the literary wealth of Greece, giving me a new perspective on my war-ravaged, impoverished homeland. I began to be proud of my origins. So a couple of things that I want you to see here is that he's talking about, how influential she was as a teacher, but he's really including a lot of details that are really important. So she started reading to the class stories of underdogs like himself. And he says, and she's reading these stories of underdogs who have a crisis and then do something extraordinary. So she's inspiring her students through this. So having those details makes us understand her as a teacher. Also, he says that she started talking about Greece, and he began to be proud of his origins. He got to know, he got a whole different perspective on his home country. One day after discussing how writers should write about what they know, she assigned us to compose an essay from our own experience. Again, we've got the topic sentence here, talking about his own experience and, her asking him to write that. And then we're going to see how that comes about. So it says, fixing me with a stern look, she added, Nick, I want you to write about what happened to your family in Greece. I've been trying to put those painful memories behind me and left the assignment until the last moment. Then on a warm spring afternoon, I sat in my room with a yellow pad and pencil and stared out the window at the buds on the trees. I wrote that the coming of spring always reminded me of the last time I said goodbye to my mother on a green and gold day in 1948. So she got him to write about his family in Greece, about, what had happened to him, which he didn't really want to write about, but she got him to do it. And then it was like a flood. So he said, I kept writing one line after another, telling how the communist guerrillas occupied our village, took our home and food, how my mother started planning our escape when she learned that the children were to be sent to re-education camps behind the Iron Curtain, and how at the last moment she couldn't escape with us because the guerrillas sent her with a group of women to thresh wheat in a distant village. So he's giving lots and lots of information here about what he learned. She promised she would try to get away on her own. She told me to be brave and hung a silver cross around my neck, and then she kissed me. I watched the line of women being led down into the ravine and up the other side until they disappeared around the bend. My mother, a tiny brown figure at the end, who stopped for an instant to raise her hand in one last farewell. So we're kind of getting, some insight into what he wrote, basically. So first, she asked him to write about his experience, and then he talks about, all the things that he wrote in there. Then it says, I wrote about our nighttime escape down the mountain, across the minefields, and into the lines of the nationalist soldiers who sent us to the refugee camp. It was there that we learned of our mother's execution. I felt very lucky to have come to America, I concluded, but every year the coming of spring made me feel sad because it reminded me of the last time I saw my mother. So he gives us, this is almost like an abbreviated, these 3 paragraphs are kind of like an abbreviated version of what he wrote, just so that we can kind of get a sense of like the details. He obviously doesn't want to give us the full on everything, but he's giving us kind of the basic idea in there. Then he says, I handed in the essay hoping never to see it again, but Miss Hurd had it published in the school paper. So she didn't tell him about it, and the reason being that if she told him, of course he would have said, no, don't publish it. But she knew that publishing it would be a very significant moment for him, and she was right. So he says, this mortified me at first until I saw that my classmates reacted with sympathy and tact to my family story. Without telling me, Miss Hurd also submitted the essay to a contest sponsored by the Freedoms Foundation at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, and it won a medal. The Worcester paper wrote about the award and quoted my essay at length. My father, by then a 5-and-dime store chef, as the paper described him, was ecstatic with pride, and the Worcester Greek community celebrated the honor to one of its own. So it's interesting here. I handed in the essay hoping never to see it again, but Miss Hurd had it published in the school paper. By doing that and then also sending it into this essay contest, it won a medal. His classmates started to react with sympathy and treated him totally differently. And his father was ecstatic with pride. So now they had an estranged relationship, but now that's also starting to change. So we're seeing all of these changes as a result of him becoming a writer. And basically Miss Hurd helping him to become a writer and giving him a voice, basically. For the first time, I began to understand the power of the written word. So that's basically the idea. This was the first time that he was respected by his father, by his classmates, by his teacher, by the essay where he won the award and all that kind of thing. So all of a sudden, realizing what writing can do. And it says, a secret ambition took root in me. One day I vowed I would go to Greece, find out the details of my mother's death, and write about her life, so her grandchildren would know of her courage. Perhaps I would even track down the men who killed her and write of their crimes. Fulfilling that ambition would take me 30 years. So it was kind of like he realized what he could do with his writing, and then he kind of made this vow of what he was going to do, down the line. Meanwhile, I followed the literary path that Miss Hurd had so forcefully set me on. So again, we've got the topic sentence. Now he's going to talk about how he set forth on this literary path. After junior high, I became the editor of my school paper at Classical High School and got a part-time job at the Worcester Telegram and Gazette. Although my father could only give me $50 in encouragement toward a college education, I managed to finance 4 years at Boston University with scholarships and part-time jobs in journalism. During my last year of college, an article I wrote about a friend who had died in the Philippines, the first person to lose his life working for the Peace Corps, led to my winning the Hearst Award for college journalism, and the plaque was given to me in the White House by President John F. Kennedy. So this is really interesting because this is a super significant moment. If we think back to when he first came to America, and he didn't speak the language. He was put in the wrong type of class. He didn't know his father. His mother had just died, right? I mean, he had so many things to overcome. And now he's getting an award by the President of the United States. So really, really interesting seeing and it was really like as a result of Miss Hurd really pushing him into writing that he got this award. So it's very, very interesting to see how far he's come. And this is why it's so appealing as an underdog story, because we're just so proud of him ourselves as readers, right? This is incredible that he did this. Then he says, for a refugee who had never seen a motorized vehicle or indoor plumbing until he was 9, this was an unimaginable honor. So yeah, so he can't believe that this is happening. Then he says, when the Worcester paper ran a picture of me standing next to President Kennedy, my father rushed out to buy a new suit in order to be properly dressed to receive the congratulations of the Worcester Greeks. He clipped out the photograph, had it laminated in plastic, and carried it in his breast pocket for the rest of his life to show everyone he met. I found the much worn photo in his pocket on the day he died 20 years later. Very, very poignant, wonderful. It almost makes me tear up myself just reading this, even though I've read it 1,000 times. At first, him and his father, he resented his father, hated his father. They didn't get along, right? But now his father is so proud of him, and he just is telling everyone about his son and all the things that he had done. And he was so proud that he put it in his pocket even the day that he died. So really incredible details in here, to really provide a touching account for the reader. In our isolated Greek village, my mother had bribed a cousin to teach her to read, for girls were not supposed to attend school beyond a certain age. So now he's going to talk about his mom. She had always dreamed of her children receiving an education. She couldn't be there when I graduated from Boston University, but the person who came with my father and shared our joy was my former teacher, Marjorie Hurd. We celebrated not only my bachelor's degree, but also the scholarships that paid my way to Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism. There, I met the woman who would eventually become my wife. At our wedding and at the baptisms of our 3 children, Marjorie Hurd was always there, dancing alongside the Greeks. So this is also really interesting because part of what he's showing is that she wasn't just a person that he met when he was young. She was there for him all the way throughout his life and really became like a surrogate mother for him. And so, when every time he had some big thing go on, she was there, right? So, she was at the wedding and at baptisms of the 3 children. She was always there, even at the most significant moments in his life. So what he's trying to show here is that teachers can make a huge difference, and that they can become a significant, sort of impact in people's lives. Then it says, by then she was Mrs. Rabideau, for she had married a widower when she was in her early 40s. That didn't distract her from her vocation of introducing young minds to English literature, however. She taught a total of 41 years and continually would make a project of some bulky student in whom she spied a spark of potential. Often these were students from the most troubled homes, yet she would alternately bully and charm each one with her own special brand of tough love until the spark caught fire. She retired in 1981 at the age of 62, but still avidly follows the lives and careers of former students while overseeing her adult stepchildren and driving her husband on camping trips to New Hampshire. So what he's getting at here is her influence as a teacher. So she didn't just influence him, but she influenced 41 years of doing the exact same thing for tons and tons of students, and she said, and would continually so she would see their potential and spark it. And then also she would avidly follow the lives and careers of former students. So it wasn't just him. She really, really loved what she did and wanted to keep in touch with her students and see what they were doing and all that kind of thing. Miss Hurd was one of the first to call me on December 10th, 1987, when President Reagan told the nation that, this is his mother's name, her dying cry, "My children," had helped inspire him to seek an arms agreement for all the children of the world. Once again, looking back at, when he first started out and was this, he was 9 years old, came to America, his mom had just died, he didn't have a relationship with his father, and now, once again, second time, a President of the United States has referenced him. So he wrote about his mother, and then President Reagan actually referenced his article about his mother, and said that it influenced his arms agreement. So incredible story. And then, "I can't imagine a better monument for your mother," Miss Hurd said with an uncharacteristic catch in her voice. Miss Hurd knows how much that means because she's known him since he first came to America, right? So, again, this shows, how influential she really is throughout his life. Okay, then it says, although a bad hip makes it impossible for her to join the Greek dancing, Marjorie Hurd Rabideau is still an honored and enthusiastic guest at all family celebrations, including my 50th birthday, where the shish kebab was cooked on spits, clarinets, and bazookas wailed, and costume dancers led the guests in a serpentine line around our colonial farmhouse, only 20 minutes from my first home in Worcester. So, again, all the way his 50th birthday, and she is still there for him, right? Even after his father died and everything, she is at every celebration. And then, let's see. Then it says, my sisters and I felt an aching void because my father was not there to lead the line, balancing a glass of wine on his head while he danced, the way he did at every celebration during his 92 years. But Miss Hurd was there, surveying the scene with quiet satisfaction. Although my parents are gone, her presence was a consolation because I owe her so much. So, even though his mom wasn't there for all of his life, she was always there. And even after his dad died, she was still there. So she was always supporting him, almost like another parent. This is truly the land of opportunity, and I would have enjoyed its bounty even if I hadn't walked into Miss Heard's classroom in 1953. But she was the one who directed my grief and pain into writing, and if it weren't for her, I wouldn't have become an investigative reporter and foreign correspondent, recorded the story of my mother's life and death in Elaney, and now my father's story in A Place for Us, which is also a testament to the country that took us in. She was the catalyst that sent me into journalism and indirectly caused all the good things that came after. But Miss Heard would probably deny this emphatically, meaning that she, even with all that, she's very modest. But we know we've just read all the stuff he's talking about, and we know that she really had that kind of impact. Then at the end, it says, a few years ago, I answered the telephone and heard my former teacher's voice telling me, in that won't take no for an answer tone of hers, that she had decided I was to write and deliver the eulogy at her funeral. So this is really important for a number of reasons. Her asking him to write her eulogy. The eulogy is usually, it's a speech given at someone's funeral by the person that was closest to them. And so, first of all, she's having him write it because he's a writer, but also it shows that, even she was influential in his life, but also he was influential in her life as well. They had this, very, very close bond, and that's a very honorable thing for her to ask him to do. I agreed. She didn't leave me any choice, but that's one assignment I never want to do. I hope, Miss Heard, that you'll accept this remembrance instead. So there, he's basically saying that he published this before she died, because he wanted her to know how much her influence meant while she was still alive. If he just gave this speech after she was dead, she wouldn't really know how much she meant to him. And so he, published it while she was still alive. So that's the idea. So this particular article is chock full of a lot of great details. It's an underdog story. It has a lot, it shows his progression and all the things that he received as a result of this person's influence. And it's also spanning a very large period of time, because he wants to show how influential she was all the way through his life. But he's only hitting the highlights because, of course, we don't want to, we don't need to know every single thing that happened in his life, just the things that were most influential and the biggest moments. So, so this one's spanning a much longer period of life than the other articles that we've read. Thanks, guys.